Marcus, welcome to the Suspicious Transaction Report and welcome to London.
Well, thank you. A pleasure to be here.
So, as far as I'm concerned, Marcus, you are an ever-present vision on LinkedIn and so on in the financial crime world. And to many people, you're a well-known face nowadays. But how did you get into the financial crime world? How did the journey of Marcus Pleyer to FATF president begin?
Yeah, thank you. This is an interesting question. So roughly 10 years ago, I started my new job taking over the directorate in the German Ministry of Finance. And at that time, the directorate was covering all issues of financial services, international financial markets, how to promote finance for small and medium-sized companies. It was about consumer protection. And then there was a tiny unit for AML. And there were two experts working on AML. And I thought, well, this is such an important topic. I think that is completely under-resourced and deprioritized, and we need to change that. And by convincing my leadership, convincing my parliament, I reshaped my directorate. And today, I have roughly 130 people working only on AML, on CFT, on sanctions. So yeah, that was what I did the last 10 years in Germany. And then I went to FATF for the first time. I think it was during the Seoul plenary. And again, there was formerly one German, very young expert representing Germany. And I looked around and I saw the United States and I saw UK coming on a higher level. And I thought, well, we must bring Germany back to the global level. And then I very quickly get involved into very difficult dossiers, Iran and others. And I started to bring the Europeans together and to make them speak as one voice as opposed to other blocks of this world. And that was the time when I think it was a Swedish guy who approached me and said, Marcus, that's great work. What about becoming FATF president? So he was the one who ignited this in my brain. And then 3-4 years later, I became the FATF president. And maybe just one remark into what motivates me. When I past school, I'm not coming from a rich family, but it was very clear to me I would never strive for money, but for the common good. And then I worked for a very long time in financial services, and well, that was satisfying, but it's always about financial stability. But AML is about much more. It's about security. It's about saving lives, right? And so I found this is a more tangible common good to strive for. And what I really like is also to work multidisciplinary, interdisciplinary, and AML requires, as a lawyer, requires everything from you, right? Constitutional, public, criminal law, civil law. So it was a challenge that I very happily took.
Sounds like the perfect job. I spent 10 years running the Center for Finance and Security at RUSI, and I always joke, if I were FATF president, this is what I should do. But maybe I should have tried harder, Marcus, like you in the last 10 years. Now, you mentioned the importance of AML and these other topics as relates to security and so forth, and we'll get on to that. But I did want to really start with your time as president of the FATF. I think of you as the pandemic president, because obviously you had to be at the helm during that period of time. But one thing that I think many of us on the outside look forward to now every 2 years is the objectives of the incoming FATF president. So could you maybe explain a bit about what your objectives were and, if you like, why you decided those should be your objectives?
So there were two questions I asked myself when I started, or before I started. One was, we have flaws in our system, and how can we repair it? And I came to the conclusion that one solution is technology. And this is why I put technology and information sharing into my agenda. Because we cannot solve these problems with all the gaps, the information gaps. So that was essential. And there was this question, how can we balance this with data protection? And people in the Secretariat warned me and said, it's a too hot topic, don't touch it. And as I said, I like challenges. I said, well, that's a reason to go for it, right? That was one. And the other question that I asked was, how can this organization contribute to solving or at least help solving the big problems of our current times, like climate change, like illegal migration and all these issues. So that's why I focused also on all the money that flows from environmental crimes and from illegal migration, from arms trafficking. So that was the motivation for my objectives.
Another acronym which has sprung onto the stage, perhaps much more since you were president, is the whole question of AI, artificial intelligence. So, and we start to hear people talking about the role of AI in AML and so on. So, I mean, how do you see that journey in technology and AML progressing? It's 2 or 3 years since you stepped down from being president. Are we making progress in that regard? And indeed, what role do you think AI has now?
I think we are making progress in parallel to the technological development. When I first discussed AI with banks in 2018, 2019, they told me we still have too little data for this, the AI is not really working well, and this has completely changed. Now I think AI is a completely necessary instrument for obliged entities to use, but also for supervision, for everyone who deals with AML. We have so many, following the money is always about bringing data points together to make the puzzle complete and to see the whole picture. And if you have 1,000 pieces puzzle and you only have, let's say, 50 pieces, the human brain may not be able to catch the whole picture, but the AI may, right? So it's important for risk assessment. It's important for detecting suspicious financial flows. So it's important for KYC. So I think it's something that will completely change, and it's already completely changing the landscape.
So when you think about the evaluation of a country, do you think we put enough emphasis on kind of what role technology is playing in the evaluation? If we think technology is important, and I would certainly agree with that, do you think there's more that we can do through the FATF channels to encourage the embracing of technology?
So when the FATF evaluates a country, it's always about effectiveness, right? And it's even now in the 5th cycle, it will be even more focusing on effectiveness. And I think there is no other way that FATF will now look into, do they really use sufficiently technology to be an effective jurisdiction in the private sector as well as in the public sector? So I'm not sure whether we need a single recommendation or IO on technology, but technology is in all the aspects that we evaluate.
So it should be a kind of increasingly a common thread across the answer. Well, there are many people I think who would be pleased to hear that, particularly in the vendor community. Now, another topic that featured in your presidency, or at least we at RUSI associate with your presidency, is the question of unintended consequences, the studies that was done during that time. That's obviously been picked up again now by the new president, Elisa de Anda. But maybe you could explain a little bit about the thinking behind raising that topic.
Yeah, that's a good point, and maybe it was one of the most important times during my presidency when I got aware of this problem, receiving letters from the United Nations Rapporteur on humanitarian issues, seeing that our standards were abused by regimes to make the lives difficult for NGOs, although they have a legitimate interest in helping people. So maybe to bring it on a more abstract level, I discovered in talking to our evaluators that they were looking at our recommendations and our immediate outcomes purely on a technical level. And when I asked them, yeah, but what is when the country violates human rights? They told me, well, we are not human rights expert. We cannot look into this. And I said, well, I mean, we in a way, we are exercising power. We always need to have human rights as a restricting level in our mind. And so I pushed very much for setting not only a minimum level of how much a country must achieve to be compliant with FATF rules, but also a maximum level when there is a country exceeding. And there was this one joke about a country that is just killing its money launderers, right? Without any due process, right? So that's not how it can work, right? And that was the moment where we thought we must do something against it and started this project. Yeah.
So obviously since then, the FATF has thought more about this issue, and as I said, the new president has picked it up. So we obviously look forward to seeing what comes out of her focus on the topic. But do you think in the fifth round we're going to see perhaps countries identified as being sort of over-compliant or abusing the standards? Is that something we might expect to see?
Absolutely. That is one of the solutions, and that will put pressure on countries to do a proper risk assessment and to indeed address the risk, but not to exceed. Yeah.
So a couple other questions I want to ask about your time in the presidency. The first is slightly technical, but we have a lot of people who focus on the question of counter-proliferation finance who listen to the podcast. And it was during your time as president that recommendation 1, so thinking about risk assessment, was revised to require proliferation financing risk assessments. Now, proliferation finance has always been a sort of slightly dodgy third leg of the FATF stool between AML and CFT. So perhaps you could just shine a light a little bit on why was it felt that step needed to be taken, a step, by the way, that at RUSI we thought was an excellent move.
Well, we saw that there was a huge information deficit among the private sector. So they were lacking information they needed for really effectively countering proliferation financing. And that was the reason why we thought we need to oblige, or we need to require countries to do a proper risk assessment on proliferation financing. And I think it has worked, because we currently see that countries are now conducting really thematic risk assessment on proliferation financing. And this helps a lot. You know that countries need to implement this until the start of the next evaluation cycle, and the next evaluation cycle will definitely look into how countries do here. And I'm certain that the level of compliance will increase.
It's also the case, isn't it, that I suppose, and we notice this when we talk to countries around the world, particularly when they find themselves on the grey list, that sometimes sort of senior political figures in countries only wake up to the existence of the FATF when they appear grey listed. So, I mean, as president, how did you find sort of engagement, if you like, with elected officials in countries who, as I say, suddenly discovered that you were a surprisingly powerful individual?
Yeah, absolutely right. I mean, there are countries, especially, of course, the FATF countries themselves, where leaders are quite aware of it, at least since we are conducting these ministerial meetings, where they become aware of how important it is and that it needs to be well resourced. This is more a problem, unfortunately, for the regional bodies of FATF, where indeed, once the team is in the country and you see a bad outcome, that suddenly they wake up, and then usually the FATF president sends a letter, and then there might be a meeting, and then countries, countries do much better once they were on the grey list, right?
It's interesting, just in that regard. And last question on FATF, I promise you. Obviously, there are certain parts of the world that find themselves significantly represented on the grey list. So, for example, countries in sub-Saharan Africa. What can we look forward to perhaps in the fifth round that perhaps balances, if you like, FATF taking a risk-based approach to the community of countries? Big financial centres obviously represent higher risk perhaps, and those countries where, yes, they might find themselves with less capability, but at the same time less systemically important for the international financial system?
So you may remember that during my presidency, we completely reformed the methodology for mutual evaluations, which makes FATF itself following the risk-based approach more than before. We no longer will put resources into technical compliance, except for something has changed in the regulatory framework. So we focus much more on the effectiveness. Even if you look at the sequence that we will evaluate countries, there is a risk indicator now in this. And then there is one, I think, very important step into the right direction, and that is that we not only follow the progress of countries that are on the gray list, but even those countries that have passed the test but still have significant deficiencies will be followed, will be observed, and they have to report back. And if they don't repair their system by time, there will be an escalation mechanism that could, in the end, escalate to identifying these countries publicly as well. Right? And I think this is a great motivator for countries to become better.
Yes, what doesn't kill you makes you stronger. I think what certainly what we notice is how, again, sort of the grey listing process does, I suppose, wake countries up, but inevitably countries with higher capacity obviously find it kind of easier to deal with that fallout than lower capacity countries.
But you know that FATF looks at so many parameters, right? And there may be one country coming out with an excellent final overall mark, but still it has a huge deficiency, or at least a significant deficiency in one part, like terrorism financing. And I think it's very important that this country just doesn't lean back and say, well, we got a wonderful mark, which we don't need any reform, but that they are pushed to do something.
I thought an interesting publication by the FATF recently, which I appreciate was after your time as president, was the report on the enablers of corruption, which did the percentages, and seeing United States, China, and I think Australia down there at 0%. It was really, honestly, in my experience, the first time where I've sort of seen the FATF perhaps, really point the finger at some countries that have traditionally got away with it. So I thought that more of that, I think, would be interesting to see. So
but unfortunately, no press coverage on that one. At least I didn't see any.
We tried our best, and Marcus, as a LinkedIn superstar, you should have shouted more about it. But so I want to move towards a topic. I can't help reflecting on the fact that that Germany this year has had a disappointment at the Europameisterschaft, but fortunately balanced that with a great victory in securing AMLA, which I'm sure will have satisfied German football fans. But before we get to that, I wanted just to sort of start a bit wider on supervision. I think you've spoken previously about sort of the gap between theory and reality, so having laws and regulations in place. Your point about effectiveness you were making. Can you just talk a little bit about why you see supervision as being so important? It's clearly a central issue in responding to AML. Why is that?
Well, supervision is about preventing financial crime, right? Or make the system fit also for successfully detecting suspicious activities. So that's why supervision is key. I mean, we are working together with the private sector as partners. But that obviously means, of course, there need to be a robust supervision of the private sector, that he really follows its obligations. So that's why supervision is absolutely important. And it needs to be a risk-based supervision, and to move from a rules-based approach to risk-based approach is a very difficult task that takes its time. And I think we already see many supervisory authorities assessing the risk and distribute their resources. But still, I think there should be improvement when it comes that supervisors also set the right incentives, that also the obliged entities can work along a risk-based approach and not just tick the box. And this is something where I think we still need to see some development.
So in the EU, that development might come with the help of the creation of AMLA, the Anti-Money Laundering Authority. So perhaps before we dive into what to expect from AMLA, perhaps you can explain a little bit, sort of from an EU perspective, why the creation of AMLA and of course the AML package as well, but specifically AMLA. Why do you feel that that's so important? You are, after all, going to host it in Frankfurt.
Yeah, you look where we come from, right? We saw this scandals about ABLV, about Danske Bank, and I think this showed us that we still have 27 different AML laws in Europe. So we have a huge fragmentation, which creates loopholes which are misused by criminals. And this is something we need to address. And this is what the AML package is about, right? It's about a uniform application of law, and AMLA is the one who will make sure it is uniformly applied all over Europe. And AMLA will have the task to make sure that this is not a race to the bottom, but that this will be on a ambitious level of AML. And if AMLA is successful, we will have supervisory convergence, which is not only helpful for the 40 entities that will be supervised in the first phase by AMLA, but for every entity, even those who will still be supervised by national supervisors. But the national supervisors will be overseen by AMLA to really apply the law in the same way. And that is important, so that we close these loopholes that are misused by criminals.
So how do you see a kind of EU-level supervisor? I mean, if there's a model in other areas, I don't know, imposing its will on national supervisors. And the reason I say that very simply is, in the UK, we have this thing called OPBAS, which you might be familiar with, which is an office that oversees the kind of non-statutory supervisors. So, we have this plethora of supervisors for accountancy firms and so on. And at least from the outside, it's found it quite difficult to exert influence even on those national supervisors. So how does one imagine the conversation going between AMLA in Frankfurt and XYZ supervisor in France that is not supervising SocGen appropriately or something like that?
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Well, the answer is twofold. First of all, we have put a clear focus on the governance of AMLA. There will be the general board with all the national supervisors sitting in and working on the so-called level 2 and level 3 measures, which is actually standard setting, right? But there is also, and this is quite new if you compare it to other ESAs, other European agencies in the financial sector, is that we have an executive board which is responsible for the direct supervision and the indirect supervision. So they should be free from national biases, right? They should be the ones who make the decisions, and they, of course, need to build, and this is the second point, need to build a trustful cooperation with the national supervisors. There is a clear delineation of authority already in the AML package. And if everyone observes that, then it will work fine. But it's not a conflict-free zone, I think. There might be supervisors, well-resourced supervisors in big countries who might feel a little bit uncomfortable that there is a new player. But there might also be understaffed supervisors who want to transfer every responsibility to AMLA, right? So AMLA will have to find the right balance here.
So I'm going to quote a LinkedIn post that I stumbled across at the weekend, and it's from you, Marcus, if you hadn't guessed, and it started, "Let's make AMLA a real game changer in the fight against money laundering and terrorist financing." How do you see that happening?
Yeah, good question. That is some points I already mentioned. It's very important that AMLA does not continue the mistakes of the past. AMLA will consist, as I said in the general board, of the national supervisors, but it will need to build a new mindset, a new supervisory culture, and must leave the rules-based approach and move on to risk-based approach. So it's a matter of mindset and building a new supervisory culture, right, which is state-of-the-art, and which should not just take the supervision as we have done it for 30 years, and implement this into AMLA, but to be innovative and to path and find new ways of effectively supervising financial institutions and also the non-financial sector.
So for those that don't follow kind of AMLA closely day to day, I mean, what happens next? Obviously, it's been an idea for quite some time. It's coming to Frankfurt soon. What's the process from here? When will we see AMLA be operational and actually do what it's meant to do, supervise?
Yeah, right. So AMLA is a standard setter and a supervisor, and it has also an FIU part, right? So for the next 3 years, AMLA will be dealing with working on the RTS, the regulatory standards, which is important in order to make the AML legislative package applicable in everyday life. So that's one very important subject. The other one is for AMLA to implement an effective supervisory regime, as I said. And for this, it first needs to set up or put down its vision, its strategy. It needs to set up a project plan. It needs to recruit a multifunctional staff team from national supervisors, but also from the private sector. It needs to use the advantage of diversity we have in Europe. And then we already talked about IT technology. Of course, AMLA needs to have the most updated, most modern technology, AI, and promote this also with among the ranks of the national supervisors. It needs to find a secure building in Frankfurt. I think we are on a good way for that. And then starts really working from 2025, and then supervision will start in 2028. So it will take some time setting up a new organization, but I think at the end of the decade we will already see the first results.
Well, you might have set the date by which I will leave RUSI, the end of the decade. I want to stay around and see what happens with AMLA. So I want to kind of zoom in a little bit further. You alluded at the very beginning of the conversation to, if you like, how small the kind of the AML capability was in the ministry where you now work when you first came across the topic. And obviously Germany's been on a kind of an interesting journey, shall we say, when it comes to financial crime in recent years. We've seen headlines, we've read the evaluation report. So catch us up on what's been happening in reforms in Germany when it comes to financial crime.
Mm-hmm. So you were referring to the mutual evaluation report of Germany, and if I can summarize the result, it is 3. It's first that we have a fragmentation in supervision, especially when it comes to the non-financial sector, right, with around 300 supervisors in our Länder. We have a too strong focus on the predicate offense, which you find in many countries.
So what do you mean by that for people who aren't familiar with
meaning we are quite successful in detecting and investigating and bringing to justice the crime from which the money flows, but we are not very good in what we call the follow the money approach, which means really starting the investigations from the suspicious money flow, right? Which is actually the effective way to fight organized crime and financial crime, right? If you only work with the predicate offense, it's sometimes only a drop into the water. But if you are able to follow the money from the suspicious activity, you will find your way into the networks, and you can really break up the networks, right? So that is something. That's a problem that you find in many countries, that they are much too focused on the predicate offense. And the third one is usually we have structures that deprioritize money laundering. If you as a police unit are confronted with cybercrime, with a terror attack, and so on, and then there is money laundering, you would always deprioritize money laundering because it doesn't threaten you in your everyday life. So you focus on those crimes that are also in the media, right? So what is the solution? The solution is that we are now setting up a federal financial crime agency that has only one mandate, and that is fighting financial crime. So it cannot be deprioritized. That is important. That's a structural reform, right? And this agency will also coordinate the supervision, so we are overcoming the fragmentation, and it will have the FIU, it will have supervision, and that is the innovation, have a criminal investigation unit under one roof. So we're also following, I think it's unique in the world, a holistic way of fighting financial crime, which more easily coordinates the strategies of these three kinds of fighting financial crime. Usually you have a gap between the supervisors, FIUs on the one side, and criminal investigation on the other side, and bringing them under one roof urges them to work together, right, into the right direction. And this criminal investigation will specialize on the follow the money approach and not work on the predicate offense.
So that sounds like a big investment by the German government. I think we perhaps alluded to earlier in the conversation that sometimes those kind of higher up in governments, perhaps elected officials, don't necessarily see financial crime as being a priority because, as you say, it's not blowing up or bleeding or necessarily making the front pages of the newspaper. So I suppose, how have you and your colleagues managed to persuade people that this is something that should be invested in? Why have they decided that financial crime is and should be a priority in Germany?
So I told you roughly 10 years ago, I took office, assumed this office, and took over this directorate. And I found out we have never done a risk assessment in Germany. So we started a national risk assessment, and the results were exactly what I just described, these three deficiencies. But this, of course, was the government's assessment. So what really helped, and I think it helps in all countries, is when you get the results of your mutual evaluation of the FATF, right? There is an international body, it's someone from outside who has checked your system, and he has some authoritative power, right? And with these two reports, I went to my leadership, to Parliament, and convinced them that we have to do something here, right? And now I think it has risen in the list of priority. If you ask my minister, he tells you today I have two priorities. That's budget and it's fighting financial crime. Which is maybe not natural for a liberal, but he understands that it is necessary for fair competition, that you don't give advantage to people who have earned their money illegally.
That's perhaps a pitch that we should be making more vocally here in the UK, because certainly I think governments do find it difficult to invest in fighting financial crime. So well done to you and your colleagues. Now I want to end by looking ahead a bit. And I want to end with a confession, which is that we last met in Stockholm at a meeting of the Global Coalition to Fight Financial Crime. And you spoke, I'm told, very passionately about the role of financial crime in fighting as a national security threat. I turned up late and I missed the panel. That's my confession. So why do you feel that that one should, if you like, apply this national security lens to the topic? By the way, we agree with the Centre for Finance and Security. That's exactly, I think, our mantra. But why do you feel that people should apply this particular lens to financial crime?
It's again a matter of priority. I think everyone understands that securing peace, fighting terrorism is very important. But proving that financial crime also threatens our society, threatens the social cohesion in our society, that it is used also by terrorist organizations. We see more and more connections between financial crime and terrorist groups. We see even countries, aggressive actors who use financial crime to finance their wars, right? So, and then if we look into our country, especially now after the Russian attack on Ukraine, and suddenly we find out who is actually owning our country, who has economic power in our country, and maybe even influences politics through economic power. I think that clearly shows that this is a matter for national security.
And I think I'm right in saying that the fight against financial crime was included in the German government's first national security strategy, which I think was last year. So can we perhaps expect to see more from Germany on this topic? Because it's not a view of financial crime which is broadly held. I think it's not an argument that necessarily everybody buys into.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, it has, as I told you, it's now on the very high on the agenda of politicians in Germany. I think on all parties. So even after our national elections next year, I'm very sure it's very high up on the agenda and will continue to be regarded as an issue of national security. And one proof of this is that we will have the No Money for Terror conference in Germany next year. And we put it to the same city and the same date as the Munich Security Conference to show that there is a connection, not only between terrorism financing and national security, but also financial crime. There will be, I think, a lot of talk in this No Money for Terror conference about the connections of financial crime and terrorism financing.
So that's February, I think. Is it February?
That's February.
February 2025.
Exactly.
So it will be even harder to find a hotel in Munich in February 2025. I can't wait for that particular bun fight. Look, Marcus, thank you very much indeed for spending time with us. We obviously very much appreciate our engagement with the German government on these topics, and we wish you success in continuing to prioritize the fight against financial crime. Thank you very much.
Yeah, it was a pleasure to be with you. Thank you.